think there's always the risk that the role that is going to be sent to define your career, well, thus far, is going to be Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is going to be there. But at the point when Peter Jackson approached you, you had not read the books,
no.
Had you? But your son had, is that right?
My son knew the story, and the long and complicated story. And I just thought it was crazy on their part, you know, when they were already underway shooting, to try to have someone play the part who had no idea what it was about. Even if I hadn't recognized many of the themes, and that essentially the foundation of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is, you know, Nordic literature and mythology and Celtic as well, but it's something that I was very familiar with.
So even though you like to do this extensive research and have that preparation, you felt sufficiently familiar with the material to be able to say yes at that point?
On the airplane, I was grasping anything I could. And when I realized, oh, this reminds me of that saga, and this reminds me of that, then one of the first things I did after, you know, in between the crash course I had with sword play training with Bob Anderson and the dialect coach and the costume fittings and everything else. And I found as many copies of, say, the Volsunga saga and other sagas to reread them. Another thing I thought of now is that I was listening to what I was speaking there. And I remember having this idea, because the character over 3 movies, you know, should gradually reveal himself for who he really is. It wasn't just the way what he called himself and how he dressed, his behavior, but it was also the fact that he was a ranger and he was around certain people from a certain part of Middle-earth. To me, that's why he would speak that way. That was part of his disguise and had been for quite some time. And I wanted to make a gradual transition so that by the end, by the coronation scene, that his accent would gradually change and become more refined, and he would let all of those masks, you know, fall away, so to speak. So it partially worked, but it made me think of that. Anyway.
But what emerges really powerfully in that excerpt, and I think is the emotional motor for the film, and it's something that in a sense was quite unfashionable in film at the time, was this idea of self-sacrifice, which is so important in the whole Lord of the Rings story, that, you know, people who are prepared to give up their lives or their freedom for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And I think probably that's something that when I initially thought of Lord of the Rings as a big epic, hadn't realised would come through as strongly as it did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's due to the kinds of actors that Peter Jackson cast, but also his approach, you know, as much as certainly after the first movie, he became more and more interested in pursuing something that he's very good at, which is special effects and the sort of more fantastical visual aspects of the storytelling. He did maintain an interest in, you know, the emotional through lines of the characters, their worries, their fears, and, you know, here again on the page, you know, could easily have played that part with a certain stoicism that would have been devoid of any real serious doubt.
Of course, I mean, another aspect of Lord of the Rings is actually it is fantastically violent, but within a kind of mythical framework. I don't know, does that make violence difference if it's mythical?
No, I mean, I don't think violence is ever excusable. It's most often a metaphor for something that's going on in a relationship or in the person's understanding or misunderstanding of their place in society, you know. Which
is an ideal time to talk about David Cronenberg, which came along next, and History of Violence from 2005. So what was it that Cronenberg said to you that so intrigued you about this project?
He was in Toronto, where he lives and usually works. And I initially said, well, you know, he needn't fly all the way to Los Angeles, because I don't think it's the kind of story, because of the way the violence was handled, that I mean, I respect him a great deal, I'm honored, but I wasn't that into it. But he said, well, I'm coming to Los Angeles anyway, I have to do this and that. And, which I don't think was true, as it turns out. But It sounded like it was true, and he had lots, why shouldn't he have lots of things to do in Los Angeles? He's David Cronenberg. And so we had breakfast, and he came in. I was no match for his powers of seduction, to be honest with you. And as it turned out, I mean, the thing that connected us right away is that the concerns we had, what was potentially underneath some of the violence, was something a lot more interesting that had to do with this idea of manufacturing a persona and lying to oneself and lying to others, which everybody to some degree does. It's a sort of survival mechanism, I think. And what it turned out to be a great experience. And the thing that was most memorable about the process of shooting the movie, and then seeing how he carefully put it together with regard to my character and the other characters, was his attention to the subtle reactions that people have, the detail of performance. There's so many things that tell you what's happening. The transitions I make from one persona to another, and then back again, and then that middle ground, are very subtle things. They're just a look, they're just a glance, it's just body position. So paying attention to that in shooting and knowing that he had it when it looked like I was maybe not doing much, and then being very careful with it in the editing, was everything. Otherwise there would be nothing there. And that was, I'd never seen a director understand every little thing that we were doing as well as he obviously does with his actors.